Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for a special edition of Arkansas Week. As constant viewers know, we like to spend a half hour in odd-numbered years anyway with our 4 United States representatives, and tonight's something new. Skype. The Honorable Bruce Westerman joins us from Washington, D.C. And Congressman, thanks very much.
For Steve, it's good to be with you with the marvels of modern technology here, where we can actually, I can be in D.C. and you in Little Rock, and without using a satellite, we're Skyping a TV show. So what will it be next?
Well, I'm not sure the technology is that wonderful, but it's better than nothing, and we should explain to the viewer that because of your schedule, you were unable to join us here in the studio the last couple of weeks during the August recess. But be that as it may, August is a memory now. We're into September, and a debt ceiling vote was imminent. Now it no longer is. We have kicked that can down the road in a way that has, I have to say, Congressman, absolutely infuriated conservatives. Your response?
Yeah, a total surprise what happened yesterday when the president announced that he had reached a deal with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to raise the debt ceiling. If there is a silver lining around that cloud, it's that it's only through December. So we'll have to come back and revisit that in December. I don't understand the logic behind it, but it is what it is. And what I've learned in this job is you can never really expect what's going to happen tomorrow, because it'll change before the day's over. And you have to be ready to adapt and move forward from the position that you're in. So right now, that looks like what's going to happen, and it's going to be attached to the debt relief, or the Harvey hurricane relief package that we passed out of the House as a clean bill with nothing attached to it. Apparently, the Senate's going to put in not only the temporary increase in the debt ceiling, but also a continuing resolution that continues to fund the government through December at the same levels it was funded at last year. And then we'll come back and redress all of this again in December.
That's not too much of a silver lining, though, is it, Congressman? I mean, your leadership had wanted to be, they did not want a December vote. You're heading into an election year here.
Yeah, we really wanted to get this behind us so we could work on tax reform, which is the major issue that we want to work on right now. But it's just, whether there's a silver lining or not, there's definitely a cloud, because it's the cloud of the debt ceiling and appropriations and all of that. I will say that we're working diligently in the House this week. We're going to do something that hasn't been done since the 90s. We're going to pass all 12 appropriation bills out of the House, send those over to the Senate. That's regular order. That's the way the government's supposed to be funded. These appropriation bills went through the committee process. They're being debated on the floor. Amendments are being offered. The bills are being thoroughly debated and voted out of the House. We're packaging those up and sending them to the Senate. My hope was that the Senate would have taken up those bills and gone through the process, and if they had disagreements, we could go to conference and come up with a report and a joint effort by both houses of Congress to fund the government, instead of doing another continuing resolution. But it is what it is. They're sending the bill back from the Senate with the CR and also with the debt limit increase. I'll vote against that. along with a lot of other Republicans, but there'll probably be enough Democrats and a few Republicans that vote for it. That's what'll get passed, and apparently the president will sign it.
Well, the House has, in the last year, sent a lot of stuff to the Senate, and the Senate has advised and declined to consent or to agree. Put it that way.
Yeah, we've sent close or approximately 300 bills out of the House to the Senate, and these aren't just do nothing bills. These are big pieces of legislation. The Senate's been bogged down. The Senate has their rule on cloture where it takes 60 votes, which means that um, without Chuck Schumer's permission, nothing really comes up for a vote in the Senate. I can't control what the Senate does, but I know we're doing our job in the House and we're sending legislation over. And it's, we sent the health care reform legislation over to the Senate. We were hoping to at least get to go to conference and work out the differences and put a bill on the president's desk. But, the Senate came down to what they called the skinny bill. It was a teeny tiny issue compared to the overall health care issue. And it was just to repeal the individual mandate, something that you don't find too many people that like the individual mandate. That's the famous vote where John McCain put his thumb down and not only killed that skinny bill, but killed the whole process. So we didn't get to go to conference. Healthcare is pretty much at back to point zero, but it's not going away. We will continue to have to work on that and come up with some way to address the healthcare crisis that's looming in our country.
Well, let me pick that up there, and then we'll go back to some other budget matters, Congressman. But is it your feeling that now, when a strong majority leader with a Senate majority, with his party in control, your party in control in the Senate, both chambers, but in the Senate, and he couldn't get the job done, or the party could not get the job done in the Senate, even with a majority, what does that say? Is Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as we know it, is it pretty much now a part of the political and the fiscal and the social, even the cultural landscape of the country? Has it been institutionalized?
It's still the law of the land, but it's still got major problems with it. When insurance rates start coming out this fall, I'm sure it's going to be a much bigger issue than what it is right now. Insurance rates continue to go up. The cost of healthcare continues to go up. And until we address the major problems with the Affordable Care Act, I don't see any change in it. We've got counties in the country right now that have 0 insurance providers. We've got states that have only 1 insurance provider. I think people thought it was political speak when the president said it's imploding on itself, but it really is imploding on itself. And at some point, Congress will have to address it. And how we get that through the Senate, again, we can do it in the House. We've proven we can do it in the House, but the holdup seems to be the Senate. And the process we use, a budget reconciliation, it gets past the 60 vote threshold. The bill we sent over to the Senate only required a simple majority to fix or to do any kind of legislation without doing budget reconciliation will require 60 votes in the Senate, which means you'd have to have all 52 Republicans and 8 Democrats on board with any piece of legislation to ever get it even heard in the Senate.
But once it does reach the Senate, or even you noted that Mr. McConnell or the majority party couldn't get the job done even on the so-called skinny bill, does that not suggest that, on reflection, a growing number of Americans, or rather like the key parts anyway of the Affordable Care Act? Nobody disputes that some work needs to be done on it. Even its advocates acknowledge.
Yeah, there's people that like it, but it's also driving up. It's the #1 driver in our national debt, which now is around $20 trillion. And the 12 appropriation bills I mentioned earlier, Steve, that's on the discretionary spending, which is around now only about 25% of the total money that's spent in the federal government. When you hear about there's going to be a government shutdown if there's not a new spending bill in place, I don't think most people realize we're only talking about 25% of government spending, of federal government spending, that's contained in those 12 appropriation bills, that's contained in a continuing resolution. The rest of that is mandatory spending, and it's in 5 programs. It's in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, uh, the plethora of social welfare programs, and then interest on the debt. Those 5 things are driving 75% of our spending. Until we start addressing those, we will never see our debt go down. We will not see our deficit spending go down. One of the hopes with tax reform is to get the economy growing at a higher rate, so that you've got more people working, more people paying taxes, and more revenue coming into the federal government. We've seen stagnated growth around 2% of GDP growth year over year for about a decade now. One of the main reasons we need to do tax reform is to get that GDP growth up around 3%, which is a tremendous boost to the economy. But we can't just do this on growing the economy. We've also got to get spending under control. We've got to attack it from both ends. So the healthcare reforms we're talking about, a lot of these regulatory reforms that we've put in place that you don't hear a lot of people talking about those, but we've had 14 congressional review acts that passed the House, that passed the Senate, have been signed into law, that are doing good things as far as helping take the onerous burdens off of businesses so that they can be more productive and get more people back to work. But all of these have got to work in conjunction if we ever want to get out of this $20 trillion debt that we're in.
What do you want out of a tax bill? And should it be at a minimum revenue neutral?
Yeah, well, again, when you get back to the process of how do we get a tax bill through the Senate, it would have to be through a reconciliation process. If you do it through budget reconciliation, I'm on the budget committee, so I'm intimately involved in this. Then it has to be revenue neutral, and that is according to the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. The score has to be neutral. So what we want to do is simplify the system. We want to make it more fair. We want to be able to for people to be able to fill out their taxes on a postcard and send them in. We want to lower the rates. We want to be able to bring offshore funds back onshore. We also want to be able to do away with the death tax. There's some good things in it, but at the end of the day, because it would be through the budget reconciliation process, it would have to be revenue neutral, according to the CBO, which doesn't do dynamic scoring. So I think even a tax bill that we could get scored neutral by the CBO, that because we would see growth in the economy over time, we would actually generate a lot more revenue than what CBO would say, and it would score a lot better than CBO. And if you look at CBO's track record, it's pretty dismal on predicting the future, but I don't know who is that good at predicting the future. But they're the mechanism that's in place that does the scoring. We have to abide by the rules until we change those rules. And if it were up to me, I would rather see more broad tax reform that included tax cuts and included spending reforms. But to do that, you've got to get 60 votes in the Senate, and I'm not sure in this climate we could ever get that.
Well, the administration, the president has floated sent you guys and ladies and gentlemen, a tax bill, or floated the outline of a tax bill, and it would appear, at least in terms of marginal rates, to skew heavily toward the very wealthiest American taxpayers. Are you satisfied with that? Is that equity?
Yeah, I think it skews more towards business taxes to get business rates down, because if we get business growing, if we get employers investing, then it's going to provide more opportunities for all Americans to have better careers and better paying jobs. We're talking about lowering the corporate rates that puts our businesses on a level playing field with businesses in the rest of the world. We're at an economic disadvantage with other countries because our tax rates are so high, which that's one reason we're losing American manufacturing jobs overseas, because we're not competitive in the U.S. on our tax structure anymore.
Yes, sir, but on individual tax rates, marginal tax rates. Are you satisfied with the administration, or is that close? You approve of that?
Well, the actual numbers haven't been released on the marginal tax rates. I'm not sure what the administration has put out, but I know that in the House plan that we're talking about lowering rates, really more for middle income folks than for higher income.
Now, that's the House version as opposed to the administration's version.
Yeah, and again, I haven't seen that from the administration, but I know what we're working on in the House.
Okay, is a tax bill feasible given everything else that's on the plate, given the partisan dynamic right now at play? Can you even get
Well,
to a tax bill this year, or for that matter, in the first months of next year?
Yeah, I think it's critical that we get it done in this fourth quarter this year, so that those laws can go into effect and we can start seeing increased growth in the economy next year. We've already seen the economy pick up. Even in Arkansas, we're seeing a record low unemployment. The disturbing part of that is if you dig into the data, we've also got record low labor participation rates. So we're seeing, um, I believe if the data that I saw, if I'm remembering correctly, like in 2008, there were actually more people working in Arkansas than there were in 2016. But because so many people left the job market, the unemployment rates lower. When I travel across my district and I talk to employers, uh, one of the first things they tell me is business is good. We would like to grow our business, but we can't find labor. We can't get people to come in and work. And these aren't minimum wage jobs. These are $15, $20 an hour jobs, or even more in some cases.
Well, Congressman, I guess I'm a bit confused. You've got well, we do have, and here in Arkansas, essentially record low unemployment. It pretty much parallels the national unemployment rate. Inflation is low. Where then is the case for lowering corporate revenues, tax revenues, and for that matter, individual revenues? Upper incomes, anyway.
Yeah, well, when we talk about simplifying the tax code, we had about $468 billion of uncollected federal taxes last year because the tax code is so complicated. When we talk about growing the economy, a real concern that I have is if the economy keeps growing, where do we actually get the labor for the jobs that are needed? Now, companies can, if they can't find the labor, they can invest those savings into capital. They can put more technology in their operations so they don't need as much labor. But that same set of data that I was telling you about from Arkansas, we've seen the number of SNAP benefits double at the same time that we saw the labor participation rate drop. We know that Arkansas implemented the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. We see about 250,000 people who are able-bodied, working-age adults who are getting their health care for free from a federal program. So the spending on these federal programs continues to rise, and in some instances, we're incentivizing people not to work instead of using those programs to get people back into the job market. And I believe the data fleshes that out.
Back to the overall Washington outlook, sir, particularly with the relationships between the executive and your party in both chambers. You pass a health bill, and he has a soiree at the White House, and then a couple of days later he calls the bill mean. Now he seems to have undercut your speaker on the matter of the debt ceiling, and people are wondering who's running the show up there.
Yeah, like I said, when you think you've got it figured out up here, you're in a bad position because it'll change before the day's over. I know the speaker continues to work very hard trying to work with the administration. And what happened yesterday, I haven't had a chance to visit with the speaker personally about that. But I know the message that we got in our conference meeting early yesterday morning was different from what came out later in the day. So it's a dynamic place, and it changes all the time.
Well, some of the changes are with your own conference, sir. It's our understanding that, for example, the Freedom Caucus, the most conservative members of the chamber, are growing rather impatient with Speaker Ryan's leadership. What do you how do you evaluate it? Is he running the House?
Yeah, he's running the House, and it's not just the Freedom Caucus. You've got a group called the Tuesday Group. I think we saw this during the healthcare debate, where you had people on both ends of the issue tugging, and there were a lot of us. The Republican Study Committee is still the largest caucus in the Republican conference, and historically has been the conservative voice for the conference. And we continue to work for solutions. I'm part of the RSC. I'm on the steering team for that. We had a meeting this morning talking about how maybe we need to take a larger role in pushing policy, and somehow try to bring the Freedom Caucus and the Tuesday Group closer together. President Reagan would say that if you could get 80% of what you wanted in a policy, you should consider that a win and move forward.
One last thing before we go on to a very personal bill with you, and that's DACA. Here again, mixed signals from the White House. He's put it back in your court, and then he's given you, 6 months, and says if he doesn't like what you do, he may revisit it. Where does this stand, and where do you stand?
My understanding of what's happened is that there's 6 more months to apply, and then I think the program could actually go longer than 6 months before it's ended. But I think this was a good move, because I believe the previous administration way overstepped on their constitutional authority and separation of powers, and this really was legislating from the executive branch. The courts are upholding that. I think the president did the right thing, but putting this back on Congress to solve it. I've always said we need to enforce the laws that we've got. We need to secure the border, and then we need to work out whatever issues that need to be addressed in our immigration policy. One thing that's happened since President Trump's been in office is the number of illegal border crossings have dropped about 60%. So, hats off to the administration, to Jeff Sessions, to Homeland Security, and all of those Border Patrol agents that are working to reduce the number of illegal border crossings. We have to secure the border. We have to fix the root cause of the immigration issues that we're facing today, like DACA. But at the end of the day, Congress needs to come up with a solution that's fair and that's just, and that addresses thousands of people that are living here in the United States that are affected by this.
Our time's growing short, Congressman, but you've got a very important bill important to you anyway, and you contend is very important to the nation's forest. You got it out of committee.
Yeah, and this is the 3rd time we've got it out of committee. It's called the Resilient Federal Forest Act. I didn't realize when I got elected to Congress, Steve, that I was the only person in the House of Representatives that had studied forestry. I did that in graduate school. Congress needs experts in certain areas. I passed the registered forester exam in Arkansas and was licensed to practice forestry there. So I've got a pretty good knowledge and understanding of the science behind forestry. And I've been able to do a lot of work on something that needs a lot of attention, and that's our federal forest. There are several 100 million acres of federal timberland in our country. And just look at the news right now in between the hurricanes and the tweets from the White House, and you'll see that there's a lot of federal lands that are burning in the West. It's a major problem that we need to address, and I believe the Resilient Federal Forest Act is a great first step in doing that.
All right, Congressman, we're simply out of time, and we thank you very much for yours.
Oh, always good to visit with you, Steve.
Hopefully we can do it in the studio back in Arkansas the next time we meet.
Yeah, that would be even better.
All right, Congressman, thanks very much for being with us again.
Thank you.
broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.